Let's start with the history of the Fed, and really the history of central banking in our country. E.J. Antoni is here. He's a research fellow at the wonderful Heritage Foundation. Mr. Antoni, how are you, sir?
Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Grateful you're here. Let's go back to the beginning, well, at least the beginning in our history. What did our founding fathers view, or how did they view a central bank?
Well, a lot of people think that the Federal Reserve is actually our first central bank. In reality, it's not. The first central bank predates the nation itself. We had the Bank of North America, which was created at a time when there was still a hope that the colonies that now make up Canada were going to join the original 13 colonies in revolt against Great Britain and form a larger nation. So we actually had a central bank before we even had a country. And the founding fathers learned very quickly the destructive capabilities of both a central bank and paper money that was not backed by species, namely gold and silver. And so when they crafted the Constitution, they were very careful, unfortunately not quite careful enough, to try to spell out that they did not want either of those for the new nation.
Did they do that by spelling it out, or did they just not articulate that they wanted a central bank?
Well, it's very interesting because when you look at the Constitution, right, we see that it gives Congress the ability to coin money, which essentially means that Congress has the authority to convert gold, silver, whatever the case may be, into coins and to set the value thereof, meaning that they get to declare how much gold, how much silver actually goes into a gold coin that will be worth one United States dollar. What it does not give them the authority to do is to create their own paper currency that is backed by nothing.
Yes, of course. What did our founding fathers know from history and also from the experience of that, what'd you say, the North American Bank, or what was it called? What did they learn that they were wary of?
So one of the things that the Bank of North America taught them, and actually even before that, what the different paper currencies that were circulated by the colonies before and during the Revolution, what that entire experience taught them was to hate paper money. There was rampant inflation in the colonies, both before and also during the Revolutionary War. And so our founding fathers were well aware of the destructive nature of inflation, how that can impact the economy of the country, and how it robs people of their purchasing power and destroys their savings. So they were well aware of the dangers just from their own personal experiences with it.
I have a question to that, but let me jump ahead, and because I think my same question applies to the founders and to Andrew Jackson. So one of the only things we ever learned in school about Andrew Jackson was he was against the banks. What happened in 1833?
So what happens with Andrew Jackson is that the second bank of the United States was essentially an end run around the Constitution. So since Congress was not allowed to print their own money, what they essentially did was create a bank that could print its own money. And so Andrew Jackson wanted to do away with this because he saw the bank as an institution which could cause inflation, which could cause violent fluctuations in the money supply, and which could severely damage the nation's economy. And ironically, Jackson was joined in this fight by another group that was diametrically opposed to him. And they were those who wanted completely unregulated banking. They were the ones who wanted essentially small banks to be able to issue their own paper currency. And while Jackson was able to defeat the bank and prevent it from being rechartered and renewed as an institution of the federal government, unfortunately, at the end of the day, he and other hard money men were not the ones that got their way in the aftermath, but rather it was the ones who wanted these small banks to be able to issue their own paper currency. And so the inflationary bouts did not end with Jackson.
So that leads to my question. We're learning the reasons why having a central bank like this is a bad thing, but there had to be a reason why people argued they should exist at all, right? So like what was the argument for the Bank of North America? What was the argument for the second bank of the United States in the first place?
I guess you could say it goes back to the original sin of modern banking, which is fractional reserve banking. So that is essentially when you put money on deposit in a bank, they only keep a small portion of that and they actually loan the rest out. So all of your money is not available to you, but lots of other people's money is. In other words, as long as everyone does not go and get their deposit at once, the system works perfectly fine. But in periods of financial stress, the system does not work fine because too many people need to get their money out of the bank. And all of a sudden, the bank doesn't actually have that money. And so it creates violent contractions then in the money supply. And these led to financial panics at various points during the nation's history, including in the lead up to the creation of the Federal Reserve. And in the last panic before the Federal Reserve was created, JP Morgan and many other great financiers got together and essentially rescued the nation's gold supply and the nation's financial system and money supply from the panic. But for many politicians, that was just a bridge too far, and they instead wanted a federal institution to perform that function instead of private individuals.
Okay, so what would have been a solution if not the Fed? Like how could we have solved this problem of these periodic runs on the banks and panics if not with a central bank?
Well, we could have done exactly what was done before. We could have continued using this model, if you will, where private individuals can come to the rescue of problems that are caused by private industry in the first place. I mean, as much as we fault the financial system before the Federal Reserve, let's judge things by their effects and not by their intentions. The greatest financial collapse and the greatest contraction in the money supply did not occur before the Federal Reserve was created, but after. And that was following the stock market crash in 1929. The Great Depression was created in large part by the most violent contraction in the money supply in the nation's history. And again, that does not predate the Federal Reserve. That was after the Federal Reserve was created. Furthermore, if you want to look not just at deflation, but at inflation, inflation has become far worse since the creation and implementation of the Federal Reserve, particularly after the period when the Federal Reserve closed the gold window, or rather when Nixon closed the gold window, so that there was no longer any connection whatsoever between the dollar and gold.
That's why, because isn't the main core, and we can get to this more with our next guest, but isn't the main goal of the Fed is to limit inflation? And you're saying inflation's been worse when the federal government has existed.
Oh, absolutely. It's a whole order of magnitude difference between the Federal Reserve without a gold standard and the nation before a Federal Reserve, when we actually had a convertibility between a paper dollar and physical gold and silver. So again, we should judge things not just by their intention, but by their actual effects. What has the effect of the Federal Reserve been? And it has been to rob people of their purchasing power and their savings.
Well, to go back to Andrew Jackson, actually, this is one of his quotes. We'll put up the whole quote here, but I'll just read the end. "Should I let you go on, you will ruin 50,000 families, and that would be my sin. You're a den of vipers and thieves. I've determined to rout you out, and by the eternal, I will rout you out," as he bangs his fist on the table about impoverishing people with the central bank he feared would.
Subscribe to the First TV today for instant access to exclusive specials and content you actually want to watch. Your support helps the First TV fuel the fight against those seeking to destroy our right to free speech. Simply visit thefirsttv.com/support to join the fight today.